Hidden Figures, Chapter 1 A Door Opens. Melvin Butler, the personnel officer at the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory, had a problem, the scope and nature of which was made plain in a May 1943 telegram to the Civil Services Chief of Field Operations. This establishment has urgent need for approximately 100 junior physicists and mathematicians, 100 assistant computers, 75 laboratory apprentices, 125 helper trainees, 50 stenographers, and typists, exclaimed the missive. Every morning at 7 a.m., the bow-tied butler and his staff sprang to life, dispatching the lab's station wagon to the local rail depot, the bus station, and the ferry terminal to collect the men and women. So many women now, each day more women, who had made their way to the lonely finger of land on the Virginia coast. The shuttle conveyed the recruits to the door of the laboratory service building on the campus of Langley Field. Upstairs, Butler's staff whisked them through the first day stations, forms, photos, and the oath of office. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God. Thus installed, the newly minted civil servants fanned out to take their places in one of the research facilities expending inventory of buildings, each already full as a pod ripe with peas. No sooner had Sherwood Butler, the laboratory's head of procurement, set the final brick on a new building than his brother Melvin set about filling it with new employees. Closets and hallways, stockrooms and workshops stood in as makeshift offices. Someone came up with the bright idea of putting two desks head to head and jury-rigged the new piece of furniture with a jump seat in order to squeeze three workers into space designed for two. In the 4 years since Hitler's troops overran Poland, since American interest and the European war converged in an all-consuming conflict, the laboratory's complement of 500 odd employees at the close of the decade was on its way to 1,500. Yet the great groaning war machine swallowed them whole and remained hungry for more. The offices of the administration building looked out upon the crescent-shaped airfield. Only the flow of civilian-clothed people heading to the laboratory, the oldest outpost of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics (NSCA), distinguished the low brick buildings belonging to that agency from identical ones used by the U.S. Army Air Corps. The two installations had grown up together. The air base devoted to the development of America's military air power capability, the laboratory, a civilian agency charged with advancing the scientific understanding of aeronautics and disseminating its findings to the military and private industry. Since the beginning, the Army had allowed the laboratory to operate on the campus of the airfield. The close relationship with the Army flyers served as a constant reminder to the engineers that every experiment they conducted had real-world implications. The double hangar, two 110-foot-long buildings standing side by side, had been covered in camouflage paint in 1942 to deceive enemy eyes in search of targets, its shady and cavernous interior sheltering the machines and their minders from the elements. Men in canvas jumpsuits, often in groups, moved in trucks and jeeps from plane to plane, stopping to hover at this one or that like pollinating insects, checking them, filling them with gas, replacing parts, examining them, becoming one with them, and taking off for the heavens. The music of airplanes' engines and propellers cycling through the various movements of takeoff, flight, and landing played from before sunrise until dusk. Each machine's sound as unique to its minders as a baby's cry to its mother. Beneath the tenor, notes of the engines played the bass roar of the laboratory's wind tunnels, turning their on-demand hurricanes onto the planes, plane parts, model planes, full-sized planes. Just 2 years prior, with the storm clouds gathering, President Roosevelt challenged the nation to ramp up its production of airplanes to 50,000 per year. It seemed an impossible task for an industry that, as recently as 1938, had only provided the Army Air Corps with 90 planes a month. Now, America's aircraft industry was a production miracle, easily surpassing Roosevelt's mark by more than half. It had become the largest industry in the world, the most productive, the most sophisticated, outproducing the Germans by more than 3 times and the Japanese by nearly 5. The facts were clear to all belligerents. The final conquest would come from the sky. For the flyboys of the Air Corps, airplanes were mechanisms for transporting troops and supplies to combat zones, armed wings for pursuing enemies, sky-high launching pads for ship-sinking bombs. They reviewed their vehicles in an exhausted pre-flight checkout before climbing into the sky. Mechanics rolled up their sleeves and sharpened their eyes. A broken piston, an improperly locked shoulder harness, a faulty fuel tank light, any of these could cost lives. But even before the plane responded to its pilot's knowing caress, its nature, its very DNA, from the shape of its wings to the cowling of its engine, had been manipulated, refined, massaged, deconstructed, and recombined by the engineers next door. Long before America's aircraft manufacturers placed one of their newly conceived flying machines into production, they sent a working prototype to the Langley laboratory so that the design could be tested and improved. Nearly every high-performance aircraft model the United States produced made its way to the lab for drag cleanup. The engineers parked the planes in the wind tunnels, making note of air-disturbing surfaces, bloated fuselages, even wing geometries. As prudent and thorough as old family doctors, they examined every aspect of the air flowing over the plane, making careful note of the vital signs. NACA test pilots, sometimes with an engineer riding shotgun, took the plane for a flight. Did it roll unexpectedly? Did it stall? Was it hard to maneuver? Resisting the pilot like a shopping cart with a bad wheel? The engineers subjected the airplanes to tests, capturing and analyzing the numbers, recommending improvements, some slight, others significant. Even small improvements in speed and efficiency multiplied over millions of pilot miles added up to a difference that could tip the long-term balance of the war in the Allies' favor. Victory through air power. Henry Reed, engineer in charge of the Langley laboratory, crooned to his employees. The shibboleth, a reminder of the importance of the airplane to the war's outcome. Victory through air power, the NSCAites repeated to each other, minding each decimal point, poring over differential equations and pressure distribution charts until their eyes tired. In the battle of research, victory would be theirs. Unless, of course, Melvin Butler failed to feed the 30 shift a day, 6-day a week operation with fresh minds. The engineers were one thing, but each engineer required the support of a number of others. Craftsmen to build the airplane's models, tested in the tunnels, mechanics to maintain the tunnels, and nimble number crunchers to process the numerical deluge that issued from the research. Lift and drag, friction and flow. What was a plane but a bundle of physics? Physics, of course, meant math, and math meant mathematicians. And since the middle of the last decade, mathematicians had meant women. Langley's first female computing tool, started in 1935, had caused an uproar among the men of the laboratory. How could a female mind process something so rigorous and precise as math? The very idea, investing $500 on a calculating machine so it could be used by a girl. But the girls had been good, very good, better at computing, in fact, than many of the engineers the men themselves grudgingly admitted. With only a handful of girls winning the title mathematician, a professional designation that put them on equal footing with entry-level male employees. The fact that most computers were designated as lower-paid sub-professionals provided a boost to the laboratory's bottom line. But in 1943, the girls were harder to come by. Virginia Tucker, Langley's head computer, ran laps up and down the East Coast searching for co-eds with even a modicum of analytical or mechanical skill, hoping for matriculating college students to fill the hundreds of open positions for computers, scientific aides, model makers, laboratory assistants, and yes, even mathematicians. She conscripted what seemed like entire classes of math graduates from her North Carolina alma mater, the Greensboro College for Women, and hunted at Virginia schools like Sweetbriar in Lynchburg and the State Teachers College at Farmville. Melvin Butler leaned on the U.S. Civil Service Commission and the War Manpower Commission as hard as he could so that the laboratory might get top priority on the limited pool of qualified applicants. He penned ads for the local newspaper, the Daily Press. Reduce your household duties. Women who are not afraid to roll up their sleeves and do jobs previously filled by men should call the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory, read one notice. Fervent pleas from the personnel department were published in the employee newsletter Air Scoop. Are there members of your family or others you know who would like to play a part in gaining supremacy of the air? Have your have your friends of either sex who would like to do important work towards winning and shortening the war? With men being absorbed into the military services, with women already in demand by eager employers, the labor market was as exhausted as the war workers themselves. A bright spot presented itself in the form of another man's problem. A. Philip Randolph, the head of the largest black labor union in the country, demanded that Roosevelt open lucrative war jobs to Negro applicants, threatening in the summer of 1941 to bring 100,000 Negroes to the nation's capital in protest if the president rebuffed his demand. Who the hell is this guy Randolph? Fumed Joseph Raw, the president's aide. Roosevelt blinked. A tall, courtly black man with Shakespearean diction and the stare of an eagle. A. Philip Randolph, close friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, headed the 35,000 strong brotherhood of sleeping car porters. The porters waited on passengers in the nation's segregated trains, daily enduring prejudice and humiliation from whites. Nevertheless, these jobs were coveted in the black community because they provided a measure of economic stability and social standing. Believing that civil rights were inextricably linked to economic rights, Randolph fought tirelessly for the right of Negro applicants to participate fairly in the wealth of the country they had helped build. 20 years in the future, Randolph would address the multitudes at another march on Washington. They concede They then concede the stage to a young, charismatic minister from Atlanta named Martin Luther King Jr. Later generations would associate the Black Freedom Movement with King's name, but in 1941, as the United States oriented every aspect of its society toward war for the second time in less than 30 years, it was Randolph's long-term vision and the specter of a march that never happened that pried open the door that had been closed like a like a bank vault since the end of Reconstruction. With two strokes of a pen, Executive Order 8802, ordering the desegregation of the defense industry, and Executive Order 9346, creating the Fair Employment Practices Committee to monitor the national project of economic inclusion. Roosevelt primed the pump for a new source of labor to come into the tight production process. Nearly 2 years after Randolph's 1941 showdown, as the laboratory's personnel requests reached the civil service, Applicants of qualified Negro female candidates began filtering into the Langley service building, presenting themselves for consideration by the laboratory's personnel staff. No photo advised as to the applicant's color. That requirement, instituted under the administration of Woodrow Wilson, was struck down as the Roosevelt administration tried to dismantle discrimination in hiring practices. But the applicants' alma maters tipped their hand. West Virginia State University, Howard, Arkansas Agricultural, Mechanical, and Normal, Hampton Institute just across town. All Negro schools. Nothing in the applications indicated anything less than fitness for the job. If anything, they came with more experience than the white women applicants, with many years of teaching experience on top of math or science degrees. They would need a separate space, Melvin Butler knew. Then they would have to appoint someone to head the new group. An experienced girl, white, obviously, someone whose disposition suited the sensitivity of the assignment. The warehouse building, a brand new space on the west side of the laboratory, a part of the campus that was still more wilderness than anything resembling a workplace, could be just the thing. His brother Sherwood's group had already moved there, as had some of the employees in the personnel department. With round the clock pressure to test the airplanes queued up in the hangar, engineers would welcome the additional hands. So many of the engineers were Northerners, relatively agnostic on the racial issue, but devout when it came to mathematical talent. Melvin Butler himself hailed from Portsmouth, just across the bay from Hampton. It required no imagination on his part to guess what some of his fellow Virginians might think of the idea of integrated Negro women into Langley's offices. The come heres, as the Virginians called the newcomers to the state, and their strange ways to demand. Excuse me, their strange ways to be damned. They had always been Negro employees in the lab, janitors, cafeteria workers, mechanics assistants, ground, groundskeepers, but opening the door to Negroes who would be professional peers, that was something new. Butler proceeded with discretion. No big announcement in the daily press, no fanfare in air school, but he also proceeded with direction. Nothing to herald the arrival of the Negro women to the laboratory, but nothing to derail their arrival either. Maybe Melvin Butler was progressive for his time and place, or maybe he was just a functionary carrying out his duty. Maybe he was both. State law and Virginia custom keep him from truly progressive action. But perhaps the promise of a segregated office was just the cover he needed to get the black women in the door. A Trojan horse of segregation, opening the door to integration. Whatever his feelings on race, one thing was clear: Butler was a Langley man through and through, loyal to the laboratory, to its mission, to its worldview, and to its charge during the war. By nature and by mandate, he and the rest of the NSCA were all about practical solutions. So, too, was A. Philip Randolph, the leader indefatigable activism, unrelenting pressure, and superior organizing skills laid the foundation for what in the 1960s would come to be known as the Civil Rights Movement. But there was no way that Randolph, or the men at the laboratory, or anyone else could have predicted that the hiring of a group of black female mathematicians at the Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory would end at the moon. Still shrouded from view were the great aeronautical advances that would crush the notion that faster than sound flight was a physical impossibility, the electronic calculating devices that would amplify the power of science and technology to unthinkable dimensions. No one anticipated that millions of wartime women would refuse to leave the American workplace and forever change the meaning of women's work, or that American Negroes would persist in their demands for full access to the founding ideals of their country and not be moved. the black female mathematicians who walked into Langley in 1943 would find themselves at the intersection of these great transformations. Their sharp minds and ambitions contributing to what the United States would consider one of its greatest victories. But in 1943, America existed in the urgent present. Responding to the needs of the here and now, Butler took the next step, making a note to add another item to Sherwood's seemingly endless requisition list, a metal bathroom sign bearing the words "Colored Girls." Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe and like my channel.